Hi, everyone. I am so happy to welcome you all here tonight for our conversation on Noa Tishby's book, Israel, a simple guide to the most misunderstood country on earth. And so, as we get started, I really would like to offer a thank you to the Miriam and Dr. Barr Israel Education Fund for sponsoring this program and our year-long Israel education program that we're just starting now in January through this whole year. And we are doing some really incredible things, and we are so grateful to the Barr family and their extended family for their support. So, a few pieces of business. As we're getting started, I just want to acknowledge once again that you're all muted. But since this is meant to be a book club type presentation, as we go along, we'll allow you to unmute yourself at specific points along the way. So I'm trying to remember when I first heard about the book. I think I was on a Zoom call when someone started talking about it, how forthright it was, how easy it was to read. It gave the facts straight up and it didn't beat around the bush, and it was a must read. And I didn't hesitate. I literally opened up another tab, went straight to Amazon Smile, and ordered my copy right then and there. And then one night, a few months later, my son Benji came over to me saying, I started reading this great book on Israel, Noa Tishby's A Simple Guide, and he was loving it too. And I was so confused. I said, where did you get it? Because I knew I had the hard copy, and he said, it's on our Kindle account. And I didn't remember buying the Kindle version, but I must have also bought that too, and I was thrilled that he was reading it. And then, after Joe Begelman, our temple president, gave his Yom Kippur address about Israel, this book, and anti-Semitism, he told me that the audio version with Noah reading it was great. And so in preparation for tonight, I listened to that too. So I have read the hard copy book, the Kindle version, and the audio book, so I have all of my bases covered. And my friend on Zoom was right. It is straightforward and accessible. And Benji was right. It's a great book. And Joe, who's also here tonight with us, you're right too, because hearing it in Noah's own voice is absolutely amazing. So however you read it, I think this book is right on target. It gives the facts on Israel, it provides a foundation for responding to anti-Zionist claims, and it helps us stand strong for Israel in the face of hate and criticism. And I know there are a lot of books about Israel out there, and they're all very good. But this one has really stuck with me, and now having gone back to it 3 times on 3 different formats, it's the one I'm most enthusiastic about right now because it's digestible for our short attention spans, it's strong, it's powerful, it's educational, it's motivating, it's inspiring. And if you've read the book, you know what I mean. But if you haven't read the book, that's okay too. Just go read it as soon as we're done. So here's a little taste of Noah in an interview with Rabbi David Wolpe from last year. So we're going to put that on for a sec.
And I wouldn't know before you wrote your book where to, like, if a 20-year-old came to me and said, I want to read a book about Israel that actually speaks to me, until your book, I literally wouldn't know where to send them. So there was like a crying need for that. Did you like try it out? Did you speak to people and see how they would react? I mean, how did you get the voice?
Well, the voice is, as you know, the voice is my voice, but I know exactly what you're talking about because I had all these people come up to me, my friends, my age, a little younger, a little older, that wanted to read something. And I knew that I can't send them to what's out there, not because it's not extraordinary, but because they won't read it. Right. So I needed that book. So, and the voice, it came up naturally. I knew what I do when I give lectures, how I talk to my friends over dinner parties, when I have a bunch of like my awesome, incredibly amazing, beautiful, like super progressive friends who throw all that misinformation at me. Like I know how to answer to it. So it was like, I'm going to write it the way I say it, the way I tell it. And because I've seen this work over and over again, I think it's going to work written down. And that's how that was. So
which it does. You can even tell by the number of people who had read the book before it came out and made comments on the book. And they're from I mean, if you look at the blurbs on the book, they're from a huge range of people all over the political spectrum, all over the religious spectrum. I mean, you've got everybody in there saying the same thing about the book.
And that's one of the things we love about this book, because it's really accessible to everybody, no matter where you stand. And Noa's great, and we really hear her voice throughout the book. So tonight I brought with me a special guest to help guide us through some of the themes of the book. Yiftah Leket is our community shaliach. He's our emissary from Israel to the Detroit Jewish community. And Yiftah, I was thrilled that you said yes without any hesitation when I asked you if you would help facilitate our book club conversation tonight. So will you just take a moment to briefly introduce yourself and maybe just give us a little bit of what we hope to get out of our conversation?
Yes, and thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Marla, for inviting me, and for Temple Israel for this whole program, an initiative called TI for Israel, which is really innovative and leading the way for Israel engagement. I am here for already a year and a half in West Bloomfield with my wife and two young daughters. Born in Jerusalem, my father and mother were shlichim as well in Los Angeles when I was very young, so I grew up kind of in the atmosphere of a Jewish community. Jumping forward, I was recruited to the army and after high school, and became a fighter pilot in the Israeli Air Force almost for 20 years. And when I retired, I decided to go change my profession and go to education. That was my passion to talk with people, be in dialogue, grow myself, and together with young teens. So I worked as an educator and an executive principal in a high school for youth at risk in Tel Aviv. And then I found myself here choosing for kind of a different educational experience. As you said, Marla, being an emissary, but I have to say, not an emissary of the state of Israel. I see myself more as a bridge of the people of Israel, kind of bringing, 9 million voices on my back. So that's what I hope to do. And tonight, it's really interesting because a book club is not, it's not an advocacy or a lecture. We really hope to talk about the book, to show you a little bit how we, perceive it, and also to hear your voices of how you see it, and to get you excited for those who haven't read it, to make you curious about reading it. We can't delve deep into every, topic in the book, but we'll try to deal with several of the themes and how to address them when confronted with them. It's like a framework and something that will help you too. Also, we know that Cantor Smolesh and Danielle Asheim, the consul for public diplomacy at Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest, will be hosting another book club in April. So this is really a dry run to get us started.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that you are here with us tonight, our authority. So the plan for tonight is this. Yiftah and I are going to have a short conversation about the book from our perspectives over like the next 15 minutes or so, followed by you having the opportunity to talk amongst yourselves in breakout rooms for maybe about 10 minutes with some guided questions. And then we're going to kind of delve into some of the themes of the book, followed by a Q&A. So feel free at any time to put questions into the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go along, or we'll do it at the Q&A at the end. I know people have a lot to say, so some of that's going to come in the breakout rooms, and hopefully some of that will come at the Q&A. And so as we get into our conversation, I just really want to kind of put out there affirm the fact how challenging it is to talk about Israel. In preparation for tonight, he and I have had about like 5 or 6 of our own book clubs just leading up to this moment, going through the book, talking about it, wrestling with the issues. And I'm so glad that we're finally here and that we get to talk about it together with all of you. But we know it's challenging. And so we just put that out there, and let's get started. Okay, so Yiftah, what did you think about the book?
That's like a big question, but I think, as you said, it took us time because it's part of the interesting book. Part of the book, it takes you to like a journey. That's what I think it is, and it's really unique between the books about Israel that are out there, because the reason of that, she's telling the story of Noah and Israel. So it's not only Israel, it's also herself intertwined in there. When she brings knowledge, she does that. When she needs to bring her personal story, she does that. When she wants to speak bluntly or even curse sometimes, she does that too. So I think that weaving together the knowledge, her story, other narratives as well, by the way, not only her narrative or our narrative or whoever you want to say, and her moral judgment, I think that's a very smart thing that enables her to send her message in a very, very strong way that sometimes we don't get because we read this history book or we read like a very, specific narrative, and she really tries to bring it in a very wide angle and at the same time anchor it in her story. I want to say I'm also a critical reader, and I don't want to shy from that. And as a history teacher, I always try to be very sensitive of the broader context and always and ways to judge certain statements, I will say. Because everything is complex, like any other book about Israel, it's easy to think you know a topic after reading one of her chapters. When in some cases it's actually a little bit simplistic. And again, this is not something intentional. She really wants to bring it. It's just the limitations of the platform. So what I encourage our readers to use this book more like as a springboard rather than a finish line. It's not the new Bible. That's what I kind of want to say.
I love that. I think it's so funny that you compared it to the Bible because, even in the Bible, it's something that we are constantly interpreting from different perspectives. It depends on our own experience, our own stories. Even the ancient rabbis did that. They turn the Torah and they turn it. That's what the Talmud is. That's what the Midrash is. It's the commentaries. So it's not the Bible, but in some ways it is because we get to turn it and bring our own experience to it. And so what did I think about the book? I sort of think I already said. I loved it. It felt to me that it was honest and it was vulnerable, and it really helped me make sense of Israel's history from a Jewish perspective, but it also allowed me a sensitivity towards the Palestinian people as well, and that's really important to me. And so I felt like Noa gave a fair representation of both sides, and I've always felt the gray area of the conflict, and I really feel like Noa honored that in the book. We can support Israel. We have to be strong about Israel, and we can be concerned about the Palestinians too. And I think that's how she describes herself. And so I loved it, and I felt like it was a great book.
I can't agree more. I totally agree with that. So I want to say there are a lot of book reviews on this book, and some of them say it's not a historical book. What do you think the purpose of the book is then? Is this like an advocacy book or an educational book? How would you frame it? And what are the problems Noa is trying to address from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the way I see it is that it's not a history book in depth, but it's definitely a history book. And Noa actually says in the book she didn't intend it to be a history book, but the whole middle section of it deals with the events that shape Israel as a country. And don't forget, there's lots of different kinds of history out there. I'm telling a history teacher this. There's lots of different kinds of history. There's cultural history and social history, and she shares that through her own family stories. And that becomes equally important to Israel's story because it makes it personal, and it makes her story personal to us, and it makes Israel's story personal to us. It's not just facts and figures, but it's about real people. And in my book, that's what makes history so exciting and so meaningful, because it's not just dates and numbers and events, but it's about the people that are engaged with it. So, the things that she talked about in the book that were particularly meaningful to me are things like she talked about the BDS movement, and that's something that's so critical to our college students and our high school students. And I have a graduating high school student, and so it's really relevant to him and to our life, and so that to me stood out. She talks about apartheid and Israel, whether Israel's an apartheid state. And, we're going to get back to that a little bit later on in our conversation, but super relevant to this week, right? I mean, it couldn't be more relevant. I really like how she talks about the Arab population, that it's not monolithic, but they're different. They have different experiences depending on where they live. And, it's just like the Jewish population. It's very diverse. She talks about the settlements, and we're going to talk about that too, and that's a topic that I think is really important. And I was really intrigued when she talked about the Palestinian city of Rawabi, and I really think that's cool because I was there back in a trip in 2018. I don't know, Yiftah, if you have the pictures that I sent to you, but I could totally relate to what she was talking about because I was there. And she's not afraid to talk about tough issues. And I know they're all tough issues, but I think she does it responsibly, and I think that's really important. The maps at the beginning of the book are really important. One thing I think I wish I saw more of was some straight talk, which she's really good at, and everything she does is straight talk, but the how-tos, straight talk about the how-tos of how to deal with Israel anti-Zionist criticism, and hopefully we'll get to that later too. So we'll show you the picture later.
Marla, do you want me to show I can show the
Yeah,
pictures.
sure. Yeah, sure. Right, so these are some of the pictures from my trip. The big picture on the left is a view of the city of Rawabi that she talks about. And then in the middle at the top, the entrance to the city. And then on the top right, also a view of inside the city. It's brand new. So, so it's really beautiful. And then just at the bottom, two pictures from the PLO offices. And, this was something that was really striking to me because at the time I was like, I didn't even know the PLO still existed. So that was pretty eye-opening experience for me to be there and be in those offices.
Yeah, and for me as an Israeli, it's incredible to see these photos. Also is incredible because I didn't have any access to these places, by the way.
Yeah. So Yiftah, when we started talking about the book, I told you that I thought Noa did such a great job of putting the truth out there in such a non-political way. And I still believe that. But you challenged me saying, is it really the truth? And of course it's political. So could you explain what you meant by that?
So from my personal and professional perspective, I think the time that I'd started understanding the challenges that American Jews have with understanding and talking about Israel was mostly in May. I mean, that's like, it came to the surface very, very strongly this last year with the Operation Guardian of the Walls and the riots within Israel. Many, many people came to me and asked me to explain what's going on. And I was thinking about it, and I had a sense that they really wanted to know the truth of the matter. That's what they even said. But I was really intrigued by that and trying to put, my philosophical and educational studies into effect. And I figured out that people really wanted like a moral anchor. They feel there's like this knowledge of body, a truth that is the truth, representing exactly what happened. And they feel that if they knew it, it covers them to understand and interpret the world in the right way, and also makes them to be on the right side. Understanding this made me talk about it and investigate and explore this. And I think that we have a more challenging task than that. We need to work kind of in two different avenues at the same time. Look for the best, accurate knowledge and facts. There are possible wherever they are. and at the same time understand that much of that is, transformed into different points of views, into narratives. And at the end of the day, there's no easy way out. We have, exactly like Noa does herself, by the way, the responsibility to make the moral judgment. It's like every single day, we each have to do that for our own self. So that's kind of where I think, in the era of between truth or post-truth, I think we're kind of need to understand how to work and balance them together at the same time.
Okay. Great. I still think it's truthful and and non-political, but I do understand what you're saying. It is different for you reading the book as an Israeli than me reading it as an American. So, so tell me what that's like to be reading it as an Israeli.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's really interesting. I'll say that for me as an Israeli, more interesting than reading the book is how it serves its direct audience. Like that's what I'm really interested to know how it affected Americans. This, our crowd tonight. I say that because for me as an Israeli, it's almost easy to say, listen, Israel is complicated, but it's my only home. It makes it harder to shake my basic relationship with it. Not that it hasn't changed, that evolved, but not in the same way. It allows me to feel much more comfortable, also to criticize it. I think one of the questions of if I'm an American Jew or live in a diaspora, can I criticize Israel? For me, it's a much more obvious answer. While for American Jews, I think it's a harder journey. I'm constantly thinking of how does it affect an American to have a country that is not his home, but still his homeland, but that place has a strong effect on his Jewish identity. And that for me as an Israeli is something I almost don't deal with. So that for me is really interesting. When I read the book, I thought about you, Marla, like how do you deal with that more than how I deal with it actually?
Yeah. Yeah,
and
I think
so what is it for you? Like what would you answer for that question?
yeah, it's a really good question, and it is intriguing that we read it from different lenses, and that your story as an Israeli and experiencing is different from mine as an American. And I still love the book, and I think it puts the facts out there for us to see. And I think that we do take it as like this is the history that we need to learn in order to be able to connect with Israel. And I think it really does kind of encourage us to consider our relationship with Israel. And this idea that you talk about, like home versus homeland, it's really interesting to me. And I understand that there's a concept which we're going to talk about a little bit later about like narrative, objectivity, subjectivity, how our own experiences influence how we see things. And she's very clear about the facts. I mean, she's very down to earth, and yet at the same time, I recognize it's not cut and dry. But being an anti-Zionist is not an option here. Like for any of us, that's not even an option. But it does allow us to recognize that there are difficulties within Israel, and so I think this book is written for diaspora Jews. And it's giving us information to be able to process and integrate that information into our own reality. So that's how I see it. Okay, well, I think we have to get to the heart of the matter. We've got this book, and the title, I think, is what it's really all about. Israel, a simple guide to the most misunderstood country on earth. And so the real question is, why is Israel so hard to understand? Why is it so controversial? And why is it so misunderstood? And so that's the question. And we're not actually going to answer that for you. Instead, we're going to send you off into breakout rooms and have you talk for a few minutes about why you think Israel is the most misunderstood country on earth, how Noa's story of weaving her own story through the book affects your understanding of Israel. And, in the time that you have together, we hope you'll share your own Israel experiences. And even if you don't think you have a personal story with Israel, maybe you've never visited Israel, your story could be anything. It could be a news report, it could be a book that you've read, it could be this book, it could be something that someone told you about Israel, but something that speaks to you that makes Israel yours. And we want you to also try and talk about like what specific topics that you read about in this book are the most challenging and how you think Noa addresses them. So we're going to go ahead and put you in breakout rooms of about 4 people. I'm going to do that right now. And these are the questions, and I will review them and send you a message of what it is that we want you to do. So here we go. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. Oh, interesting.
Just so you know, once you do go to your breakout room, you will be able to unmute yourself.
So, Rabbi Josh, when I went to breakout rooms, the only person that comes up is Yiftah.
Hold on.
So Marla, after they share, you ask me maybe to share the slide.
Okay, great. So hi everyone. I hope that you had a good time talking. I know it wasn't enough time. I'm sure it wasn't enough time, but hopefully we'll have more opportunities. I've now given you the power to unmute. So if anybody would like to share why they think that Israel is the most misunderstood country, or to share a little bit of your Israel story or a topic that you think is most challenging, put your name in the chat and we will call on you, and we'll let you share what you think and what you guys talked about in your rooms. And don't be shy, because I know you're not shy.
Well, one of the people in my group pointed out how the population of the Palestinians is being manipulated by the leaders who are choosing to accept aid for basic necessities and instead using it for very destructive ends and stroking the division and exacerbating the situation rather than doing anything to come to a solution together. I hadn't read the book, so of course I was very interested to hear what he had to say. I would like to read it.
Good.
But I'm obviously disappointed at how blatant it all is, even to this day.
Okay, thanks, Jean. I am going to call on Marilyn.
I too was the only person in my group that had read the book, but everybody, so it was a little hard to discuss, but to me, what was confusing before I read the book was I have 2 views of Israel. The negative side is I don't like that the ultra-Orthodox chief rabbinate has so much control that Reform Jews can't practice, marry, and pray at the wall, etc. But at the same time, I feel so strongly about how Israel has the right to exist. And if these Arab countries would just accept Israel's, acknowledge that, I think peace would come. And how many times do you go into a war and you be expected to give back the land that they attack you, and you're supposed to give the land back, and then this whole BDS that's being kind of brainwashed the people in the colleges. One person said she was worried about her grandchildren and talking about it, and it's complicated, and there's a lot of issues that are worrisome.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, Yiftah, were you going to say
something? I just wanted to say that kind of, I think both of you in a sense, and you're touching really important points about the complexity between the people and the leadership as well, which is true in Israel
And here.
as well, maybe here, in the States as well, but especially in the leadership and the people, the Palestinians, because they were also much less organized and cohesive, and their whole forming as a peoplehood or a nation or whatever you want to call their transformation is very challenging for them as well, and that goes back into the complexity of the conflict. So I think very important notions that you said, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Look, I was just going to say something here, and Yiftah heard me say this. Israel's a complicated country to talk about because it really has currently not a defined border. Most countries are older, have defined borders. Nobody says where does U.S. start, where does Canada start, or Canada end, I suppose, whichever you're looking at. It's also a very highly contested, very small piece of real estate. And with anti-Semitism as rife it is in the world, it's easy to say they shouldn't have a right to it and let's just sort of push them out. So it makes for a good conversation. But I would also say something, and then I'll shut up here, is that I think every country is complicated, but Israel is a bigger conversation. There's a lot of things, we could talk about US politics, and certainly I don't want to get into that, but every country is complicated. We are just hypersensitive to the conversation going on with Israel. And I think because it's not defined who the people are, it's a brilliant meshing of many places, just like the US is, but we don't talk about the US's borders anymore because it's 200 years ago when we became a country, and Israel still is being talked about as they still work out the borders.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I think if people wanted, sorry.
Oh no, I just want to say, I think, and I'm going back to the book all the time because we're discussing the book, Steve, for what you said. I think she does a good job also in, she's kind of repetitive in some of the ways, in some of the places, and it kind of helps because she tries to emphasize on the important stuff because there's so much, right? And so much that is vague. She's trying to give us some anchors to hold on, and she does that in a good way because she is repetitive in that sense. So just to connect this to the book, I think that's the answer for me.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to have Joe and then Paula, and then we're going to move on to the next section, but there'll be time to talk. So, Joe?
I just wanted to mention, when she gets into the citizenship of all the Muslims living in Israel and that are citizens of Israel, and I think there's a Muslim on the Supreme Court and Muslims in, their Congress, the citizenships that they have, it was a very moving thing that it cannot be an apartheid state. And once you see like Muslims and Jews and, freedom of religion there, freedom of women's rights, gay rights, lesbian rights, you just don't have those in any of the countries around there. And Israel was the first state, the first country to come out with freedom of all of those things. We're the original. And I think that's pretty moving.
Yeah, for sure. And Paula? You're muted, Paula. You have to unmute.
I never knew about the UN Committee on Refugees, and I found that utterly amazing. And I think it's part of the problem. If people generations of people are given money to stay where they are, what motivation do they have to move somewhere else?
Thanks. And we're going to talk about refugees in a little bit. Yeah.
That's right.
So I'm just going to ask everybody to mute again.
But you lost the point.
What?
Because Arafat kept most of the money. He was a multi-billionaire.
Right. That was definitely something that was that she talked about in the book, for sure, about how the money was misused. So, when Yiftah and I were talking about the Yiftah, I stepped over your toes. Go ahead, and you're going to show.
No, I just want to say the question of misunderstanding, for me, there's a little bit of awkwardness in the title, in a sense, because misunderstanding is kind of like there's a point that I understand, right? If there's a misunderstanding and now I understand. And I think that's also part of the problem, because there is no like point that I understand a relationship that I want to create, or an ongoing, like a state or an identity. It's almost like asking, do you understand your relationship with your wife? I don't still understand it. I'm constantly, working on it. So I kind of want to say that also like creates this cycle of misunderstanding. Like, we want to understand, someone asks us, we feel maybe ashamed that we don't have enough knowledge or whatever. We seek this body of truth, of knowledge, whatever. We don't find it because it's too much. It's very fragmented, like Steve said, and a lot of stuff. And then we go back to like not understanding. What I think is a solution for that is kind of more being in the point that we are on a journey, like, again, as a springboard. We're constantly wanting to find better truth, better knowledge, better data. What is our point of view? What do I feel today about it? What's the news? Maybe I can talk with an Israeli and understand how it looks from the ground. And so kind of evolving, my relationship with Israel has evolved over the years, and my father, and you, Marla, we were speaking about it. So that's kind of, I think, the question of misunderstanding, where it lies. I think a lot of it comes from this aspiration to understand 100%. Let's maybe leave a little bit. Let's take that burden off our shoulders. I think we will actually understand better. So that's kind of my answer to that question. Only mine.
I think that's, yeah, thank you. You were going to show us some slides.
Yeah, so I can show. It's kind of, it's a little bit like what I'll share it for a moment. It's really what I said, so I'll show it like very briefly. So again, the cycle of what makes us feel we don't understand, and how we seek to understand. Although it's really hard and complicated and difficult. And at the same time, I think that if we're looking for this Israeli ways, understanding Israel is really kind of this, not even a point, again, a journey that we do between the knowledge, the data, what is my narrative, what do I feel, and other narratives as well. And I think, again, the book, if we're talking about the book, she really holds that point very well. And we need not to take her book as, again, as the new Bible, but, oh, I can create my own book. I'm going to write this relationship with Israel moving forward. That's kind of
right. And I think that's actually the answer to the question that was in the chat earlier about truth, right? The question was something about, I don't have it in front of me, but it was something about how, why did you not think that she presented truth? And I think that's
I can say for that sense. I can also give an example. It's not that there's something not truthfully about it. It's not like she's lying or something. It's just that a certain piece can be from a broader perspective, and there's some other ways to look at it at a certain figure. I can even say, for example, when she talks about the numbers of Palestinians in the West Bank, that's debatable. Some researchers say there's 1 million, some researchers say it's 2 million. So when she says like a certain number, you can always like question and think about other, again, truths, not because she's lying, just because the limitations of reality are kind of like that.
right. And what you just showed us in the slide about, my story, another narrative, that there are different perspectives, as we've been talking about. And we all have those. And, I was going to tell a story. I think maybe we're running a little bit out of time, but I'll just tell it very briefly. And that's just that, during my Israel year, so in my rabbinical school year, each of us spend a year in Israel. And I happen to have lived there during 1995-96, which is a really long time ago now. But it was a very tumultuous time. And it happened to have been the year that Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. And I was at the peace rally where he was assassinated. And, it was it was amazing. You know, I think it was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had, with Arabs and Jews dancing together and singing together. And I just remember these circles of people dancing and eating and celebrating. And truly, I don't think I'd ever experienced anything like that in my whole life. And we were having so much fun, but we had to get up for school early the next day. And so we left. And when we got back to Jerusalem, something was different. Something had changed. All these people were like crowded around kiosks and watching TV, and our Hebrew wasn't really good enough to understand what had happened, but we figured it out. Someone told us. I don't exactly know what happened, but literally within minutes we went from this like highest high to this devastating reality that the prime minister had been assassinated. And it just, like, what had been so tangible and so meaningful minutes before was like gone. And that's kind of how it is there. And, you know, that's just my one story. I have
No, it's an amazing story. I want to say
stories.
You've been like in this such important moment. It's amazing to.
Yeah, I mean, to have been there in literally a moment of history, right? And then to weave my experience into it. And it's something, you know, 30 years ago now, and yet it, you know, it stays with me like it was yesterday, and it very much informs my feelings about Israel, just like Noah's stories inform her experiences of Israel. So, look, we all have stories in Yiftah. I wish you could tell us 100 of them, and you will over the course of this next year when we're studying Israel. But we want to sort of turn to the like hands-on. How do we deal with some of these issues? And so we want to do kind of like a what would Noah say in these scenarios, and we want to hear what you have to say. So we've created some polls. We're going to launch the poll. You answer the question, and then we'll just discuss it for a little bit. But it gives you an opportunity to kind of put your feeling out there. So here's the first one. I hope you can see this. Can you see it? Oh, yes. Nod your heads. Okay, great. So here's the statement. I heard that Amnesty International called Israel an apartheid state. This just happened this week. They work to help people who suffer from human rights abuses, so it must be true. And then you can answer what you think the response should be. So the response would be, it's just not. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The second one would be, apartheid recalls the segregation of South Africa. Israel has Arab political parties, Supreme Court justice, citizens with equal rights. It's not apartheid, it's anti-Semitism. And the third answer is propaganda to equate Israel with apartheid. But it's complicated when it comes to Arabs in the West Bank because they don't have the same rights there, which no one thinks is a good idea. So there's no right answer. What do you think how do you think you would respond? Don't be shy. We still have a few people who need to respond. So Yiftah, it's interesting. It's, you know, it's kind of equal.
Yeah, it's very interesting, I think.
Okay. So what does Noah have to say?
Can you put it up again? Because we submitted it and we don't see it anymore.
Oh, I don't know if I can.
Maybe I can share my screen and show it.
Here, I can share the results. How about that?
Oh, okay.
Can you see
yes.
that? So we have a little bit more of a majority in the second answer. All right. So Yiftah, what would Noah say?
Let's see what Noah said. Noah said, hope everybody can see this. There has been an attempt to brand Israel as an apartheid state, similar to South Africa. This is infuriating. South Africa was a horrific regime with fierce segregation and discriminatory laws and no rights for its majority Black population. Israel grants equal rights to all its citizens, including, of course, the 21% of citizens who are Arabs. The third largest political party in the Israeli parliament is an Arab party. Arabs serve in the IDF, and they are a part of the judiciary system, academia, entertainment, and medical fields. All of it. It is not perfect, but it is a powerful democracy. We can and should have a separate discussion about the situation in the West Bank. But when we do, let's also try and be clear about why there isn't a Palestine and on these lands yet. To paint the entire state of Israel as an apartheid state is a lazy argument with possible grave consequences for the only consistent democracy in the region. It is also simply false.
Thank you. I think she addresses it pretty clearly, don't you?
Yeah, and I totally agree with the idea that it's, let's say this, going to the details here is really important. Actually, the separation between what's going inside of Israel and the West Bank is one thing, and also what's going on in the West Bank and the reasons for that. Apartheid, putting like a label like that, for me, it just puts like a cover of smoke of everything. It's like just in order to flame up everything from a very not responsible, I think, standpoint. And that's unacceptable for me. I prefer really talking about the issues, and there are, civil rights and human rights issues that need to be addressed and that are not perfect in Israel and mostly in the West Banks.
Yeah. I'm going to put up a second poll. This one is about the Palestinian refugees. This is the statement. If you are at a dinner with friends from work, your family is sitting next to you at the dinner table, and the host pops up with this statement. I just heard today that there are 5 million Palestinian refugees. That is horrible. And so you can answer one of these questions, but with one of these statements. It is horrible that there are Palestinian refugees. I know that about 700,000 Palestinian Arabs were displaced when Israel was declared a state in 1948. I don't know where the 5 million come from. Second, included in that count are people like Gigi and Bella Hadid. Their dad was born in Israel in 1948. His family left and became refugees. He became a real estate mogul in Washington, D.C. And the last one, the Palestinian Refugee Organization, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, is a $1.2 billion organization with a staff of 30,000. Something's not right here. So let's hear what you have to say. You know what I love is that we have pretty much equal answers on these things, and because everyone has a different way of responding, and that's something that I love. All right, we'll give you just like 20 more seconds to answer. A few more people haven't answered yet. Okay, so here's where we are. Almost identical with a few more people answering number 3 with something's not right here, right? What would Noah say?
Noah said, while UNHCR is constantly working on getting the global numbers of refugees down, with UNRWA, the numbers go up, up, up. After the 1948 war, there were approximately 700,000 displaced people. Now, UNRWA has 5.6 million refugees registered in their books. How is that possible? UNRWA automatically counts as refugees Palestinians who are now 3 to 4 generations removed from the 1948 conflict, which is not the case for any other refugees who've passed through UNHCR, which will review case by case and make some exceptions if need be.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. Like, why would the Palestinian situation be so different from every other refugee situation in the world? It's not like some refugees have a different status than others. Like, it just seems so strange that it would be different for Palestinian refugees.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one more poll. And hold on, for some reason here. Oh, give me 1 second. Settlements. Okay. What about the settlements? If they just stopped building, there would be peace for sure. Okay, so you can answer, I completely agree. That's the answer to making peace in the Middle East. You can say, I wish. Settlements aren't flimsy tents like the Israelites in the wilderness, but are big cities. Many are suburbs of Jerusalem, like West Bloomfield is to Detroit. It's not as easy as we think it is. Or you can say, it definitely should happen, but it's not the only requirement for peace. There have been many opportunities for land swaps, but it's never worked when it came to signing a peace agreement. So interesting.
Nice.
All right, if somebody thinks number one, then you should put your name out there because nobody has voted for number one yet. Okay, we're going to end the poll. And you've got some for the middle and a lot for the third one. So interesting. Okay, what would Noah say?
Noah would say, oops, sorry. The subject of the settlements is not in any way, shape, or form at the heart of the Israeli consensus. The internal debate is passionate and ongoing. Here is, in very broad strokes, the internal divide within Israel regarding the subject. The hawkish right wing of the political spectrum is leaning pro-settlements. The dovish left is anti, and the center, which is the majority of the country, is somewhere around, give us a good deal and let's talk. The support for the settlements is not mainstream, and the internal debate is directly affected by the level of trust Israelis have in the Palestinians.
And you should know, when we were preparing this, we have videos that we wanted to share with you explaining these. We sifted through so much information. I have no idea how she even put this book together because there's so much information. It's so rich. But and I think ultimately there's no one answer, but they're all good answers. So so I think we want to turn to you. What are your questions? We want to try and answer them the best we can. You can put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute and speak, we can let you do that. I did see a question already in the chat, Yiftah, that I'd like to put out there. It's less relevant to what we're talking about, I think, Gordon, but I think it's a good question. So, has Noah addressed the issues of denial of the right of return to converts to Judaism from African, Latin American, or Asian communities? Does she talk about the power of the religious sector, even to the extent that at a meeting in the Knesset on Monday, there was discussion of allowing women to give eulogies? Freedom of religion is not settled in Israel. So she doesn't talk about that at all, though they are things that I think we talk about and we want to talk about, especially as a Reform community. These are things that are high up on our list of issues in Israel, and we're not ignoring them. It's just not the topic that's dealt with in this book. So, Yiftah, anything else you would add to that?
I would just say we have some programs that are addressing some of those issues in Federation, but maybe I'll talk share about them at the end.
Yeah, and I would also say that our next program for TI for Israel is Rabbi Kaluzny talking to Anat Hoffman and about Women of the Wall. And the question is, what's worth getting arrested for? So, she's going to be talking about that specifically, and that's March 3rd. Okay, Linda Zlatov says, I heard Yossi Halevi Klein speak today at an AIPAC event. He wrote Letters to My Palestinian Neighbors, which I have on my bookshelf. His message today was extraordinary regarding the new Israeli government coalition being a tremendous breakthrough. Also, the impact of the Abraham Accords extraordinary. Arab nations are embracing Israel while U.S. is not and more anti-Semitic. And how weird is that? Great comment. And if you haven't read that book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, it's an excellent, excellent book, and I would recommend.
I have some extra copies in my office. If anyone wants, I can help them get one.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good book.
All right, Marilyn, I'm reading your comment. Qatar said they won't recognize Israel. You know, that's sad.
Our group, the real question, somebody that was younger, which doesn't take much to me, really wanted to know is how do they answer people who are negative to Israel because of all the things that are being said about the Palestinian situation. That's...
So what's your answer? Like, what do you say to people?
My answer? So just to see I understand the question, what do I say to people that are negative towards Israel? Because, well, I'll say, I mean, for me, the idea is having a conversation and a dialogue. I never try to come with a place of, you know, I know everything. This is the truth. Israel is right. Palestinians are wrong, or you are wrong, having this idea or whatever. So listening, engaging, trying to unfold the complexity with the data, the facts, and also the different narratives. This means you need to, first of all, yes, you know, make yourself knowledgeable as much as possible, and also, as Marla, as you said, have an empathy to the Palestinians and show empathy to their suffering and to the situation and to the complexity. I think it helps to have the discussion with people that are negative, because they see that, you know, we are actually a nation that is aspiring for peace and for people to live their life. I really believe that at the end of the day, with all the things that happen in Israel, and you know, sometimes there are a lot of mistakes and troubles, I do feel and believe we are a people of peace and people that want towards that. So I think the heart-to-heart conversation eventually sometimes creates more connection and breaks that negativity, but it doesn't always work. What can I say?
Yeah. Somebody private messaged me saying listening seems like such an easy task, but it truly is the main reason there are no solutions to so many issues. And I think just right what you said, like, first of all, I don't think people are educated when they come to you and they say, you know, Israel, they don't support Israel because they, you know, their relation to the Palestinians. I don't think they understand. And so by engaging in those conversations, it's an opportunity to educate other people. And I do know that a lot of people have changed their minds once they engage in dialogue. So, you know, we hear things and we think they're true because it's on the news, because it's in the paper, because other people that we respect are saying them. And it is about educating ourselves and educating other people. So I know that Linda wants to say something, so I'm just going to ask you to keep it short. But yes, Linda, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you. I'll try to keep it real short. I'm only 20 pages into the book, and I very much want to read it. Was Noa's motivation for the book when she arrived here in the US feeling that there was so much misinformation, disinformation, and she wanted to have a voice to be able to explain what is so and what is not so?
Well, she's been here for a long time and she just wrote the book. I think it's because over the years that she's been here, she's been confronted. I mean, she does write this in the book so many times, finding herself having to explain to people about Israel. And she kind of became a reluctant advocate, like a reluctant ambassador to Israel. Not that she didn't want to be, but like that wasn't what she was intending to do. And when she found herself in a position to be able to speak for Israel, she realized that she did have a lot of, you know, a lot of power. A lot of people listened to her. And so, you know, she wrote the book because she wanted to be able to help people advocate for Israel and educate them and teach their history. So that kind of goes back to our original question, Yiftah. Is it a book for advocacy, for education, or for history? And I think it's all of the above. So someone also, I think Linda, was you wanted to say something about anti-Semitism? Or was that?
Yeah, I did. I feel as much information as we want to put out there and put things in perspective and educate and enlighten and bring the truth. There's the anti-Semitism is a fundamental hatred of Jewish people. I think by people in power that want to diminish the Jewish people in terms of their value and who they are, as much as we try to educate and inform, I just feel it's so unfortunately embedded. Racism, anti-Semitism, Asian, you name it. There's so much discrimination in this country. It's just very, very troubling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's kind of a downer. I don't want to end on that note. Jay, I think you have a good question here. Why isn't it emphasized that 700,000 Jews fled from Arab lands to Israel after its creation? And why isn't it emphasized, I would ask, that the surrounding Arab countries didn't welcome them with open arms? And why is it not talked about that a plan was put forth, the partition plans, that Israel would be its country and there would be a Palestinian country? So why and they rejected it. So why is that stuff not emphasized either? I don't know. Good question. All right, I think we could take one more question and then we're gonna have to say goodnight. We could probably talk for hours. I know we can talk for hours. So if there's one more person that would like to speak, we will.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation with my neighbor who happens to be Chaldean and has family that is Palestinian. And I presented exactly that question because that's always been my question. Why don't any of those other Arab countries take those people in? They're all surrounding and we are just one little teeny country. Why do we have to take all those people? And she said, they're all different Arabs. It's like saying that the United States and Canada and whatever all have to are all the same, and they're not the same. But I mean, we finally came to the conclusion after a long discussion that the two-party state is the only solution, and that we're never really going to totally get along. It's the way it is. So you're going to have to try to make the best of a two-party solution.
And what I would say as my last word, and I'm sure Yiftah has a last word, is that in places where people want to get along, they get along beautifully. There are so many places in Israel that have, programs and communities where Arabs and Jews, Arabs and Israelis get together and have the same goals and the same mission and are friends and are, neighbors, and it's beautiful. And so I think if we want to make it happen, we can make it happen. Yiftah, you have a last word?
I'll just say, first of all, thank you so much. It was really interesting and inspiring for me. And I want to say, continue with your journey with Israel, develop it. And I want to offer some opportunities as well. First of all, my job is not only to have programs, but a coffee date, a conversation, a reference for a movie or a book. You can always call me. I'll even put it here quickly, so you can just, I'm a resource for all of you, and also to offer two programs that we're currently having. One is related to what you said, Marla, is a shared society series. The first one is actually going to be in the 2nd of March, a comedy show called Comedy for Peace, 2 Jews and 2 Muslims coming to Royal Oak to share their stories and to laugh together. And the continuous of, again, knowing what's going on in Israel, we have a series called Coffee Press, which I'm putting in the chat, the link to sign up for it. It's a monthly deep dive in a subject, each time a different hot topic. 20 of February, we're going to talk about religion and state, the newest developments of, the kashrut, women of the wall as well, and of course the conversion issues that have changed lately. Some really cool, like interesting developments. So that's the event that I just posted. So thank you again. Thank you, Marla. Thank you for
Thank
Temple
you.
Israel.
Thank you for joining us. Having you here and kind of giving us your perspective on the book is so helpful, and it was so fun for me to be able to to have all our book clubs leading up to this and to spend the time together with you. I just want to take the moment once again to thank the Miriam and Dr. Barr Israel Education Fund for this and for all of our TI for Israel programs. In case you don't know, Noa Tishby herself is coming here on May 16th in person. So mark that date on your calendar and tell all of your friends, and we'll be giving you more information as we get closer to that. And I just want to remind you that Rabbi Kaluzny is doing a program, Israel at the Crossroads of Women's Rights, when it's worth getting arrested, with Anat Hoffman in March. And so there's all kinds of wonderful things happening. And then we mentioned it at the beginning, but in April, we're having another book club on this same book. So it'll be really interesting to see how Cantor Smollash and Daniel Ashheim deal with the same topic. So you'll be prepared for that because you've already read the book for today. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I hope this was meaningful to you. I hope you learned something, and we'll talk again soon.